Every single year, without failure, an NFL head coach loses their job, and somebody has to step up and take that spot. This offseason, we had 7 head coach openings, and all of them have been filled. It seems like more now than ever, NFL head coaches are on the shortest leash, and right now we're in a time of instant results. So NFL head coaches only have so much time to prove their worth. So today we're going to go through all 7 hirings from this year's coaching cycle and give them a grade on how good this hire was. We're going to start off with the Patriots hiring Mike Vrabel to be their next head coach. And I'm giving this hiring an A, mainly because of how much of a low floor, high ceiling type of hire this is. I can confidently say that this is going to be a massive upgrade over what we got from Gerard Mayo in his 1 year in New England. And going with Vrabel in particular shows that they still valued the fact that he has the head coaching experience. There are very few options out there for this cycle that had more experience than Vrabel. It's pretty hard to beat a former coach of the year, a guy who's been to an AFC championship game, won his division 2 times in his 6 years as a head coach. You just can't find that kind of experience every offseason. And then you get the added benefit of the fact that he's only 49 years old, and he played for your franchise, and he's in your franchise's Hall of Fame. I mean, the guy won 3 Super Bowls with the Patriots. This just seems like it was a layup hiring for the Patriots. And I think everybody knew it was coming, especially when they only requested 4 interviews. It was pretty obvious that Vrabel was the guy. I'm not going to go too in-depth on Vrabel's staff behind him, but I have liked a lot of the moves that he's made, and I like the situation he walks into already having potentially a franchise quarterback and a number of extremely good players on both sides of the ball. And finally, I think what Vrabel brings culture-wise and what he brings to this franchise is so valuable. He brings a nice blend of the old guard with Bill Belichick and all the Super Bowls and that dynasty, and also kind of a new wave. He was a fun coach. He was a head coach that's in the spotlight. He can dish it. He can take it. He's amazing at the podium. He's great when he goes on these podcasts and whatnot. He brings an interesting type of culture to a New England Patriots franchise that's always been kind of known to be old school. Our next hiring was the Bears bringing in Ben Johnson from the Detroit Lions. I'm giving this one an A-, and I'm even close to going below an A- just because everything with Ben Johnson just seems too good to be true. I mean, how often does the young, hyped up, offensive mastermind coach pan out? I mean, that's a label we put on so many different offensive coordinators that then get head coaching jobs and then they immediately flame out. But I don't want that to be the case. I like what I've seen from Ben Johnson, and also for the Bears, I'm to the point where I just kind of want them to have a hiring that works out. And I like that Ben Johnson does fit the mold of the modern offensive guru type head coaches like the McVays and the Floors and a number of other guys. And on top of that, he's been running one of the most inventive and successful offenses we've seen in the NFL. And when they first brought in Johnson, I thought that this hiring was going to be very dependent on especially the offensive coordinator and the rest of the position coaches that he brings in. And I think he did a fantastic job bringing in the right guys. Declan Doyle to be the OC. He brings in another guy who, like himself, is a former tight ends coach. Declan Doyle, if you don't know much about him, Broncos tight ends coach from last year. And then he made a move that I think a lot of first-year head coaches should be doing, which is bringing in a former head coach to be his defensive coordinator, that being Dennis Allen. He also brings in Antoine Randall, who was his wide receivers coach with the Detroit Lions, and a number of other great hirings for the rest of his support staff. I really like the Ben Johnson hiring, but it's the Bears, and you have to have your reservations. Our next hiring comes from the New York Jets. They hire the man who was alongside Ben Johnson in Detroit these last couple of years, that being Aaron Glenn, their former defensive coordinator. I'm maybe taking it a little bit too easy on this. I know Jets fans will probably disagree with my grade. I'm starting off with a B. I think that this move certainly upsets a lot of Jets fans. You're tired of hiring first-year defensive-minded head coaches and it not working out. But the thing that jumps off the page to me is that very quickly we realized what the Jets were about. As soon as Glenn got in the building, they move on from Aaron Rodgers. They're working on changing things. The change at GM. They're changing so many things within this franchise. You can only hope that we're finally going to see the tides turn in New York. And I think the big thing is will Aaron Glenn bet on himself early on? Is this team who has a good draft pick, going to try and draft a future franchise quarterback in this first round? Do they think there's a quarterback willing to do so? And also for Aaron Glenn, is he willing to put his ass on the line if this quarterback doesn't work out? I mean, we've seen that time and time again. A new head coach drafts a new quarterback, things don't work out early, and all of a sudden, the quarterback's out of the league and the coach gets fired. I also like some of Aaron Glenn's hires, but I don't necessarily love them. I think Steve Wilkes was a great hiring, but I don't know too much about Tanner Engstrand, who's going to be the offensive coordinator. He came from the Lions, so you can assume he's doing something right, but I just haven't heard much about him. So I give them the B for this hiring because I want to be optimistic about this. I want to say that the Jets are making the right decisions, but I'm not entirely sold on the Aaron Glenn hiring. I think a lot of it will be proven in the draft and at the combine. Kind of these next couple of months are really going to tell me, at least early on, what we can expect from Aaron Glenn. And the next hiring we're going to grade is one that certainly caught me by surprise. The Raiders hired Pete Carroll. And I'm giving this one a B-, and it might sound odd, but listen to my explanation first. Because I'm about to say, this is a perfect hire for what they're trying to do right now and what it seemed like Tom Brady, who now has such a big influence in the decisions being made for Las Vegas, it seems like this is what he was looking for, was a guy that can come in and create a culture of winning and a culture that is at least similar to that of what Brady saw when he was winning. I really like that they go for the younger, future-minded hiring with the GM, John Spytek, and then you bring in Carroll, who just works perfectly for what they're going for. You've got a great pick early in this draft, and you're in a city that really should be an enticing free agent destination. It just hasn't been because of the issues with the coaching staff over this time in Las Vegas. And I do want the people out there to realize Pete Carroll hasn't lost his fastball. He wasn't really bad in his last couple years as the head coach in Seattle. It was just clear that he was getting old and the franchise just needed a facelift. And that's what he's coming in to do with the Raiders, is give them the facelift. And you're going to get 3 great years out of Pete Carroll. But it's just 3 years. I can't go higher than a B- when there's no future involved in this hiring necessarily, or at least not with Pete Carroll. Obviously, there's a future to be had for whatever he does, but the future's not there with his name on it. So when you take a step back with this hiring and you just look at it and say, the task at hand is use these 3 years to instill a culture, to, of course, develop some players, and just at least build the foundations for what could be and what can be a very, very successful franchise for years to come. Our next hiring is Liam Cohen to the Jacksonville Jaguars, one that certainly has its storylines to go along with, but in my opinion, the grade's got to be a C-. Look, let's just start by saying I'm going to put aside my opinions on Liam Cohen and being a cornball, because if you guys have listened to the podcast at all, you know that I think Liam Cohen's a cornball. I think there's a number of other ones in the NFL, but I just don't think he's the guy. I mean, the resume just doesn't really jump off the page. He's never spent more than 3 consecutive years in one place in his entire coaching career. And last season was really the first time he's ever found high-level success. Like, if you isolate last season, sure, he probably deserved a chance. But I think there's so much behind that last season that it just doesn't seem right. Like, it just didn't seem when this coaching cycle started that he was one of the guys that would have gotten a job. I understood why he was getting interviews, but it just didn't seem like he was actually going to get hired. And I mean, from the franchise's standpoint, the Jags had already screwed themselves by holding out on firing Trey Baalke. Then they still haven't fired him when they interview Cohen the first time. Then they decide to fire him when Cohen turns down the job. Then Cohen takes the job. You already have enough issues there. I mean, it's just all so Jacksonville. All of this process is just so Jacksonville to make this hiring. And when I say that things are so Jacksonville and so Jaguars-like, that is not a good thing. That is honestly, it's just a really bad thing. And I also don't like that he didn't really bring in any former head coaches to be on his staff. So it's a lot of guys inexperienced in these roles. And I just also don't like that. And I think what really sucks for the Jags more than for Liam Cohen is that the Jags certainly could have gotten a better guy if they would have just fired Trey Baalke right at the end of the season. It was a conversation that was being had when the season ended, is will the Jaguars fire their GM? And it seemed like he was going to return. And then all of a sudden you fire him. So then you're now late on the coaching cycle with a new GM. You're late on hiring the new GM now that you've hired the new head coach. It's just such a mess of how they've gone about this coaching cycle. So this one gets a C-. I think there's a lot of things that certainly could go well. I think the Jags have the blueprint. Just will Liam Cohen be the guy that puts it all together? Our penultimate hiring is the Cowboys hiring Brian Schottenheimer. And you can already tell from the inflection of my voice that I'm not a fan of this one. This one's getting a D. And coincidentally for Dallas, but also because it's just not good. I think we all saw this hiring, and the first reaction was either you're a casual fan and you said, who is that? Or you said, why was the guy that nobody wanted to interview and nobody was talking about becoming a head coach taking this job that really should still be Mike McCarthy's, which is crazy to say. I know that needed to end, but it ended too late into this cycle and you screwed yourself. But it seemed like Jerry knew he wanted to do this, which is even worse. And Jerry Jones is really the problem with this signing. Of course, he's the one that made the decision. But honestly, look, Jerry Jones is going to get tired of this guy. He's going to kick him to the curb in a couple years. And he's going to make me wish that I went ahead and gave this an F. But I'm giving it a D just because there's a roster to play with. I mean, if he went somewhere where there was just no quarterback and no wide receivers and no Micah Parsons and whatnot, and two guys unbelievable in the secondary, I would be like, yeah, this is an F. But there's a roster of players that will play the game. I mean, that's as good as it will get for Dallas. Brian Schottenheimer is not going to make a difference. Brian Schottenheimer is not going to be winning multiple playoff games in a season, maybe not even in his career. Brian Schottenheimer is not winning you a Super Bowl. Mike McCarthy, who you just kicked to the curb, has literally won a Super Bowl before. And instead you're giving Brian Schottenheimer a chance, whose literal best asset is the fact that he's the son of Marty Schottenheimer. So really his only hope is that those genetics take over and they start playing some good football before Jerry Jones is on local radio just absolutely trashing the guy. All right, our final grade. The New Orleans Saints, the last ones to hire, and they hired Kellen Moore, the now reigning Super Bowl champion offensive coordinator with the Eagles last year. Prior to that, Chargers, and before that, the Cowboys, where he was a quarterback as well. Kellen Moore is an interesting hire to me, but I wouldn't say interestingly good necessarily. I'm giving this grade a C. I think it's fine. You could maybe say C+, but the situation that he steps into in New Orleans is very weird. This whole hiring is weird, is the best way to describe it. And maybe my grade is a little bit lower because I am a Falcons fan and I do hate the New Orleans Saints. And I also hate the city of Philadelphia, which is where he was winning games last year. So that could certainly cloud my judgment here, but I'll try to put that to the side. And putting that to the side means that I'm willing to say that Kellen Moore could be a good head coach. I think the legs are there. There's a reason why for years he was coming up as a coach with the Cowboys, and he was constantly in the conversation for head coaching jobs. Things don't necessarily work out the way they maybe should have. Maybe he wanted them to in Dallas. Then he gets the job in LA, and that was just kind of a mess from the jump. And then he moves to Philly, and all of a sudden, it's perfect. Now, he was working with Saquon Barkley, who was a MVP finalist. He rushed for 2,000 yards. He was working with the best offensive line in the NFL, and also happened to have just the keys to the most unstoppable force in the game of football, which is the tush push. And with all those things, he wins a Super Bowl, and now he gets that job title that's been just outside of his reach going on about 5 years. We haven't gotten a full staff yet from Kellen Moore because he is the last guy that has been hired, but I do think that very early on, things will be make or break for Kellen Moore in New Orleans. He's really going to need to make great decisions very quickly. And of course, he'll have the help of his general manager, but a lot of decisions need to be made quickly and correctly because you are in a financial crisis. When you look at the books for the Saints and how the salary cap is screwing them and how they've really screwed themselves with the salary cap, and that's just not going to get better anytime soon. You locked up a lot of guys long term, but you've also got a lot of great young players who want to get paid, and you don't have the funds for it. So we'll have to see what happens in New Orleans with Kellen Moore and his hirings, but I think this is going to be a really, really important start to his coaching career in New Orleans, and he's got to get off to a good one. All right, that is all of the grades. Tell me what I got wrong. Tell me who I'm wrong about. Am I wrong about Aaron Glenn? Am I wrong about Schottenheimer? Man, I hope I'm wrong about both of them. I hope all these guys are great, except Kellen Moore. Go Falcons. If you guys did enjoy the video, please leave us a like here on YouTube and make sure you're subscribed and turn on post notifications. And if you enjoyed this, make sure you tune into the podcast every Monday and Friday right here on YouTube, anywhere that you get your podcasts. We're making the return to the podcast after 2 weeks off this Monday. Mark the calendars. March 3rd, we're back covering the Combine. So we've got a lot of draft coverage coming in March and April to look forward to. We've got the MLB season starting up. So a lot to look forward to here at Second and Short. We're looking forward to seeing you again. I'll catch you guys later. Peace.